What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to take a look at connecting Next.JS to Google's Firebase. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the four main functions of Firebase. We're going to add authentication, we're going to interact with Cloud FireStore and store data, we're going to interact with the real-time database, and lastly, we're going to look at the storage. So uploading files such as images and videos to their storage. So this is what we're going to be building today. You might notice that this is very similar to the Next.JS starter files that they give us. And that's because I simply created a new Next.js project and I only added what I needed to. So I kept the index page the same. The only thing I added was this login button. So we click that, we're brought to the auth route, where we can then sign in with email, Google OAuth, Twitter OAuth, or GitHub OAuth. Let me go ahead and sign in with Google. And now we are brought to the home page. So there's a bunch of stuff going on here behind the scenes. This is fetched dynamically. This is fetched dynamically. If there's a profile pic, it will show that. Here, there's not. And then down below, we have a bunch of buttons. The first button is to send data to Cloud FireStore. And if I click this, it will send one of each type of data that Cloud FireStore accepts. So it will send a number, a string, a latitude and longitude, a map, and a couple of others. So if I go ahead and click this, we see data was successfully sent to Cloud FireStore. And then we can also read data from Cloud FireStore. So if we go ahead and click this button, data was successfully fetched from Cloud FireStore. So we can close this alert, and if we go into the console, we can see what we fetched. We have an object, and there we go. So we sent all of this data, and then we fetched it back. Next, we have this increase count button, and this is interacting with the real-time database. So if we click this, it will simply increase the count by 1. So it increases it, and then immediately gets the result back and updates it. So 13, click it, we'll go to 14, and so on. And you may have noticed that when I logged in with my email, this count started at 12. And that is because it stores the count in the database, and when you log out and log back in, it will update it to the last count that you had. So it's not always starting at 0. And then finally, here we can choose a file and upload that to the cloud storage. And of course, you can log out as well. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is initialize Firebase. So I am just in a fresh Next.js application, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder, and we're going to call this Firebase. Now in here is where all of our Firebase files will go. The first file we want is init firebase.js. Now in here, we need to initialize Firebase. Now before we do anything in here, let's go ahead and open up a terminal and install two dependencies. We're going to say yarn add Firebase, and we also want Firebase-admin. Now what we can do is inside of the init Firebase file, we can go ahead and call that. So we'll import Firebase, and then all of these imports are optional. But we're going to need auth, FireStore, and storage. We're not going to be implementing these two, but I'm just going to import them just in case you need them. Next, we need the client credentials. We're going to create a variable const client credentials. Inside of here, we need to initialize all of our secrets. So to get these credentials, the first thing you're going to need to do is initialize a web project for Firebase. So simply go through those steps, and once you have that initialized, you're going to want to go to the settings of your project. And in there, you can find all of the following credentials. So the first credential we need is the API key. So instead of setting it like this as a hard-coded string, we're going to use a .env file. Go ahead and create a new file. We'll just call this .env. And in here, you are going to put all of your secrets. So as you can see, these are all the secrets that you're going to need. And all of these can be found in the project settings. So go ahead, pause the video, find all of these in your settings, and enter them in. Now, once you have that, what we can do is we can come back here, and for the API key, for instance, we can say process.env dot, and we called that next_public underscore Firebase underscore API underscore key. And we're going to do this for each one. Okay, there we go. So now we have all of our credentials unique to your project. Now below here, we can export our default function. We're going to call this init Firebase. And we're going to do a quick check. First, we're going to say if point Firebase .apps.length. So we want to make sure we have this. So we'll say Firebase.initialize app, and we need to pass in our client credentials. So that's all we need to do. I'm going to add one more thing, and this is a check for Firebase analytics and performance. So if you have that, go ahead and put this code in there. And then after you do all that, we're going to simply log this out to the console. And of course, if we run this, nothing will happen because we're not actually calling this. So go ahead and open up pages, index.js. So inside of index.js, let's import that init Firebase. We're going to import it as Firebase from Firebase/init Firebase. And then just simply go down 2 lines and call that. So now, if we open up a terminal and we run this using our yarn dev command, if we open up a local host, we should get no errors. Okay, so the page loaded. Let's inspect console. There we go. Firebase was successfully init. So if you don't get this, feel free to comment down below what your error is, and I'll try to help you out. All right, go ahead and stop the server. So now that we have Firebase init in our project, we can go ahead and add any functionality we want using Firebase. So we're going to start off by adding the Cloud FireStore functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this init Firebase, and the next thing that we're going to do is we want to add a folder called components. Now we're going to store all of our Firebase components in here. And inside of here, let's create a new folder, Cloud FireStore. So all of our Cloud FireStore components will go inside of there. Now we're going to do 2 things with Cloud FireStore. We're going to read and write to it. So go ahead and create 2 files, one write.js and one read.js. Now we're going to start off with the write. Let's go ahead and import Firebase, and this is being imported from our yarn package. And we also need to import Firebase/FireStore, and those should be wrapped like that. Okay, let's create a basic Next.js function. Let's export that. Let's create a return statement. For now, let's just return empty HTML. So sending data in FireStore is pretty easy. Let's go ahead and create a function. Say const send data, and inside of here, we're going to try to send data. We need a catch. And if there's an error, let's just go ahead and log that. So to actually send the data, we're going to need to access the FireStore method on this Firebase object. So let's say Firebase.FireStore. We need to access a collection, and we can name this whatever we want. I'm going to name it my collection. And then we have a document on that collection. Now you can leave this empty like this, and it will create a unique document. but because we want to fetch this data back, we need to know what the document name is. So we're just going to call this my document. And then we can set the data using the .set method. And inside of here, we have an identifier, so maybe ID, colon, and then whatever the data is. So if we wanted a number or a string, like that. So I'm going to go and paste in some data that we're going to send. Okay, there we go. And this is actually all the data you can send. So we have a string example, a number example, a boolean, a map, an array. Note that it is not type specific. You can have whatever variable types you want in the map and array. We have a null data type, so you can actually send null. We have a timestamp, and we have a geopoint. And note that for the timestamp and geopoint, I am using methods on Firebase FireStore to do that. So when we run this, it will find the collection named My Collection, or it will create that if it's not already there. It will find the doc My Document. If it's not there, it will create it and set this data. If it is there, it will set this data and override whatever is there. After that's done, let's create an alert, and we'll just say that the data was successfully sent to Cloud FireStore. Now we need a button to actually activate this. So instead of returning this empty HTML, we can return a button. We'll say send data to Cloud FireStore, and we'll create an on-click listener. In onClick, we just want to simply invoke this method, send data, just like that. Let's create a new terminal and let's run this app again. And just a quick note, before you try to send the data, you need to make sure that your FireStore is activated. So go to the Firebase console and simply click the couple of buttons to actually activate your Cloud FireStore. Okay, so we'll go back here, and I'm just realizing that we didn't actually import this component. So let's just go ahead into the index. We'll import right to Cloud FireStore. That is from components / Cloud FireStore / right. And we can just throw this, we'll put this right inside of the container. Just like that. Now we come back here. Here's our button. Let's go ahead and click it. Data was successfully sent. We can see my document, and we see all of the data. Let's go ahead and read that data now. So same thing as right. Let's go ahead and copy this function name, and we'll switch out read and make that right. Export the function. We'll return. Now that we know we're going to create a button, we can just return a button right off the bat. We'll call this read data from Cloud FireStore. On a click, we'll say read data, and let's go ahead and create that. Okay, so now to read data, we're going to say firebase.firestore.collection. So we need to grab the collection that we want. Remember, we named that My Collection, and you can see that here as well. Get the doc that we want. Remember, we named that My Document. Copy that, and then we can use the method .onSnapshot, and this will return a callback containing the data or an error. We'll say function doc for our document, and all we want to do with this data that we have, which is in this doc variable, is simply print it to the console. And obviously, if this is your application, you might want to display that on the screen somehow. You could do that easily using useState, but for now, for our purposes, I'm just going to log it to the console. And we want to access the data on this document object. So doc is everything. We just want the data. So if I say doc dot, we can see we have data exists, get ID, a couple other things. So we want this data property. And this should console.log all of the data from Cloud FireStore. After that's complete, we can alert that we got the data. Like, again, let's wrap this in a try catch loop. We'll say try catch, and we'll console that error out and alert it. All right, let's go ahead and import this read component, and we will use that right here. Now, if we go back to our app, we see read data from Cloud FireStore. Go ahead and click that. We get our success alert. And if we open up DevTools and go to console, here's our data object. Open it up, and there we go. All of the data that we sent over. All right, next up is adding authentication. So let's go ahead and close out write and read. Keep index open because we're going to need this. Inside of our components, create a new folder. We'll call this auth. Make sure that is in the component folder. Okay, there we go. And we need one file here. We'll just call this Firebase auth.js. Now this will handle our authentication flow. And in this step, we're actually going to init Firebase inside of here instead. All right, so we're going to import a couple of things. The first is our init Firebase method. The second is useEffect and useState from React. The third is styled Firebase auth, and that is from React Firebase UI. So let's go ahead and stop our server and actually install that. And what this will do is allow us to use that pop-up auth flow that you saw in the demonstration of this. So I didn't have to code any of that UI because they provided it to me in this package. And there is an option for you to do your own, but that is a little bit longer. So we're not going to cover that in this video. But this will allow us to get up and running quickly and easily with Firebase auth. Next, import Firebase from Firebase/app. We need to import auth from Firebase. And then we're going to import two more things, set user cookie and map user data. And we need to create both of these, but we'll do that when we come to it. And you'll notice that we imported init Firebase here. So we can add that here, init Firebase. And now we can remove that from the index because we really don't want that to be happening in the index because somebody could land on a page other than index first and we wouldn't init Firebase. So by doing it here, whatever page the user lands on first, Firebase will be init. We're going to say const Firebase auth config. And here is where we can pass all of our parameters. The first is sign in flow. We're going to set this to pop up. And then here we can put all of our auth providers. So email and password, GitHub, Google, anything else you might want. We're going to say sign in options. This will be a list. The first in default, provider firebase.auth.email auth provider dot provider ID. And then this takes an additional property, require display name. I'm going to set this to true. And you'll see what this does, but it simply asks for your name in addition to your email and password. And then down below here, you can add additional auth providers that you may want. So I'm just going to add Google, Twitter, and GitHub. And you will have to go into Firebase console and first activate authentication, and then also activate each of the additional providers you select. So Google, you have to click that and turn that on. Twitter, you have to turn that on, and so forth. Next is the sign-in success URL. So after the user logs in successfully, redirect them to the index page or home page. We're going to say credential helper is equal to none. And then for our callbacks, we're going to say sign in success with auth result. So on sign in success, this will be an asynchronous method. We're going to grab the user redirect URL. And what we're going to do here is we're going to get the user data and set some cookies. So we're going to say const user data is equal to map user data, passing in that user. We're going to create this in a second. And then we also want to set user cookie with that user data. Oh, not callback, data. So let's go into our Firebase folder, create a new file, map user data.js, say export const map user data. This takes in a user, and we'll have this user object, and it will have a couple of properties on it. And we're going to put those properties into individual variables. So the first property is the UID, and that is a unique ID associated with each user that Firebase gives us. We have an email. We have XA, that will be used for the token to help us with the cookies. We have the display name and the photo URL. And I got this information from the Firebase documentation. Links to those will be in the description. And then we can simply return all of that. So that's map user data. Now we need this set user cookie. So again, in the Firebase folder, new file, user cookies.js. We're going to import cookies from JS cookie. Go ahead and add that via yarn. And then I'm going to simply paste in some code. And I took this code directly from the Next.js documentation. So they have a GitHub repo on using Firebase with Next.js, and this was in that repo. So basically all this is doing is setting cookies, so if you log back in, it will remember you. So that's user cookie. Back in Firebase auth, we're going to say const Firebase auth. We're going to use useState to set a render auth variable and a set render auth method. Initialize that to false. Then we're going to use useEffect to set that method to true when the window is registered. And then we're going to return a div. Make sure that render auth is true. If it is, display our styled Firebase auth, and we can pass in our configs that we did. So this takes in UI config, that is equal to Firebase auth config, and it takes in Firebase auth, which is equal to Firebase.auth. And if this is not true, we need to say else null. And then let's export that. Okay, just looking over this. Don't know how this got here. Go ahead and remove that. And use callback. Visual Studio Code will sometimes add imports for you. When you type something, if it thinks that's what you're trying to import, it will import it for you, but sometimes it gets it wrong. Okay, so that is Firebase auth. Now we can actually add a page that we can actually go to that root /auth and go through this flow. In pages, new file, auth.js. We're going to import that Firebase auth. That's from components, auth, Firebase auth, and we're simply going to return a div, and then we're going to put Firebase auth, and then below that an A tag inside of a P tag that says go home with an href of /. And before we test this out, I want to add 2 more files in this Firebase folder. The first is Firebase admin.js. I'm going to paste in this code. Again, this is taken directly from the Next.js website. I'll link to that in the description. And then again, I'm going to create one last file calling this user.js. And again, in here, I'm going to paste some code. Now, basically what's going on in here is we're creating a hook that we can use to get the current user wherever we are in our app. And then we're also defining the logout method. But to save time, I'm just going to paste that in here. I suggest you go through this and look at it and make sure you understand how it works. But if you don't, it's not that important. You'll see it's very easy to use this. So now with that, let's go ahead and say yarn dev, open up our app, we'll reload this. Now, there's no button on index to get us to auth, so let me go ahead and add that. We'll do that right above here. Okay, just like that. Now if we click this, it will bring us to login. All right, here we go. Our go home button, so you can click that to go back. And now we have our options. So if I hit sign in with email, tester@test.com, there we go. Enter a first and last name. That is, if you recall, this required display name. We set it to true. You can set it to false, and this will not show up. And then choose password. I'll just say test123. And we'll save that. Now we should be redirected home. There is one problem that you can probably notice. We are authenticated, but we still see login. So what we want to do is, in the index, we only want to show all of this if the user is logged in, and show them something else if they're not logged in. So let's go ahead and use that use user hook that I was talking about. That is from Firebase /use user, and right beneath here we'll say const user, use user equals to use user. Now we'll say if user, so if we have a user, let's return some information. So let's return all of this. And of course we need to wrap this in something. There we go. So if there's a user, return h1 of their name and h3 of the email. If there's a profile pic, return that. Write to Cloud FireStore, read to Cloud FireStore, and this is new, a button to log out. And as you can see, we're simply invoking this logout method, and that should be in place of this use user. I don't know what I was thinking when I added that. There we go, logout. Okay, just like that. And then we'll say else return this. And we want to remove these two. So if there's no user, prompt them to log in. And if there is a user, show their information and give them some options to write to Cloud FireStore, read from Cloud FireStore, and log out. So I'm getting an error here because use user needs to be wrapped in braces. Awesome, so that's working. Read data from Cloud FireStore is not defined. Must have typed that incorrectly. Awesome, there we go. So we have our name, our email, there's no profile pic, and then we have our options here. Pretty cool. And just to test that these work, sent successfully, read it. It was read successfully, we can see that here. and we can log out. And that redirects us back to the auth page. You can change that to go back to home. Now, if we do go back home, there we go. We don't see any information because this is false, so it returns all of this. And we can just go back and log in here. So authentication is working. The one final thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and open up our Cloud FireStore components, read and write. And if you recall, we are writing to a document that is a hard-coded string, my document. Let's replace this with the user's unique ID so that we can store unique information for each unique user. Let's import that hook. Let's call the hook. And now instead of setting the doc to my document, let's set it to user.id. You remember that is going from map user data, this ID here. So we're getting the UID from the user object when they log in, and we're setting it to this variable here, ID. So let's do the same thing to read. Change the doc, import use user, and use it. Now if we go back here, let's go ahead and sign in. And here, if I demonstrate an incorrect email and password, tester@test.com, next. As you can see, first off, it recognizes that this person has already registered, so it doesn't prompt for the name. If I enter the password in wrong, it doesn't let me go in. All right, there we go, entered it correctly. So now let's go ahead and send data, sent successfully, read it. So we get the same data, but if we go in here, we didn't write it as my document. We wrote it to this unique ID, and I'm not sure which one it is. It's one of these longer ones. But as you can see, we were able to write to their unique ID. Now, if someone else was to log in, they could write and read different data.